it's a pleasure to join you. As a science-based company, we clearly believed in the science of climate change, and we apply those same science-based principles to climate action. From our own operational commitments that we support with math and a path, including those projects of how we need to get there, to our product development that helps our customers do the same. In fact, we've reduced our own greenhouse gas emissions over 78% on an absolute basis since 2002, and including over 38% since 2019. We clearly have a lot more to do, but we are making progress. We are following that math. We are following the science. So we know that the world overall needs climate innovation, and our strategy is to help deliver the next generation of materials to help decarbonize the world. So, for example, we're helping to modernize the electric grid with renewable power generation technologies to connect larger power grids and ease strained systems to ensure more consistent reliability. We're supporting the transition to electrify transportation by incorporating products in electric vehicles to help improve the thermal management, the battery efficiency, the safety, the acoustic solutions, heads-up displays, and more. And we're making buildings more energy efficient through innovations such as cool roofing granules, smog-reducing granules, window films, solutions that decarbonize the concrete industry. And tackling those hard-to-abate emissions is an exciting challenge for us. That's why we're working on alternative fuel technologies like green hydrogen, relying on advanced filtration technologies and expertise that we use today in products like Filtrete filters and N95 respirators. These things evolve and they extend and they continue to reinvent 3M as we have in the past. It's this foundational expertise and our drive to look forward that has led us to partner with Svante on the direct air capture program that you're going to hear about to remove carbon from the environment. We see this as one of many solutions, as John Foley mentioned before us, that can help advance the world to drive towards that carbon solution with a 1.5 degrees C limit that we're all driving towards. We're very excited about the opportunities in this dynamic space and the focus of today's presentation. You'll hear from my colleague, Cory Sauer, our global carbon capture lead at 3M. Yes, he has that title. And you'll hear from Claude Letourneau, president and CEO of Svante. They're a leading carbon capture company and a carbon removal solutions provider. So our work with Svante is an example of the power of people and ideas coming together to do some profound things and tackle some of the world's biggest challenges. Because to implement climate challenges like this, climate innovations are required. It will require collaboration. In fact, science, collaboration, and urgency are the key words that I think about during Climate Week. Collaboration amongst companies across different value chains and working with governments and NGOs and others in a variety of spaces are the ways that we need to find to tackle our carbon emissions and climate challenges. Given that our materials are integral and embedded in so many things today, we know that it takes collaboration. We know that this innovation can happen best when we're working with others, not only performance-wise, but that can help be successful in commercial solutions as well. So it's this collaboration that we can use to scale climate innovations and achieve the impacts that we need to limit our temperature increase to 1.5 degrees C by 2050. Many of these solutions are available today, including what Cory and Claude are going to talk about, and they're ready to be scaled up and deployed. It really is, I believe, an exciting time for climate innovation. I hope you join us on this journey, and I judge that you are by joining us today in this meeting. And with that, I would like to introduce Cory and Claude to the stage. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's go. I feel like a rock star in this big room.
Well, good morning, everybody. So like Gayle mentioned, my name is Cory Sauer. I am the Global Carbon Capture Lead at 3M.
I'm Claude Letourneau, president of Svante, a Vancouver-based company, and we are a purpose-driven company focusing on carbon capture and removal solution, ready to go, and at modular, at granular, like Jonathan was mentioning. So happy to be here.
Likewise. But before we get into carbon capture, I think first it's important to start with the idea that 3M's mission is science applied to life. And that sounds like a noble endeavor, but I think it's something everybody in the audience can appreciate. We are all here today at the Nest and here at Climate Week because we want to find ways to apply science to what is life's greatest challenge, climate change. We're all interested in these climate solutions that John Foley was talking about. And he gave an incredible keynote that talked about all of the climate solutions that we already have. Climate solutions that are at scale today, that if we just deploy them, we can bend the curve and set ourselves on a path toward net zero. Solutions that will mitigate emissions or restore carbon sinks from almost every aspect of our lives. The way we get our energy, the way we travel, grow our food, make our products, build our cities. But the climate solutions that we have at scale today are not the only climate solutions that we need. And John Foley talked about this too. At the same time that we deploy everything we can, we have to continue investing in the next generation of climate solutions, finding ways to make that technology more feasible, more scalable, more economical, so that in the coming years and the coming decades, we can deploy them along with everything else that we have. And I think chiefly among them, we have to envision a future that involves carbon management, which is core to Svante's business.
So I think what you saw earlier is that we emit about 40 gigaton of CO2 from mankind activities. And nature basically is able to cope with half of it through natural filters like trees and ocean. But we have an imbalance that accumulates in the atmosphere every year of about 20 gigaton. So as a minimum, we need to get to 20 gigaton, and ideally, carbon capture or carbon and removal is about 10 in the capture side, which is avoiding the CO2 going out in the atmosphere, primarily from industrial emission. And then the net zero is the removal of the CO2 that's already in the atmosphere. So the example I can give you, if you walk into your bathroom and you see your bathtub overflowing, what do? First thing you do is you turn down the tap, make sure water doesn't go in anymore, yes? So that's what carbon capture is. And then you pull the plug, you roll up your sleeve and you pull the plug and you get the water out of the bath. That's what carbon removal is. And if you don't do this, you have to swap the bath floor, and then that's what the climate impact is if we don't do this thing. And that's going to be more costly to clean up the mess than it is about removing or capturing the CO2 in the first place. The cost of doing all of this, including renewable electric vehicle, hydrogen, and carbon management as a pillar, has been estimated to be about, in physical investment and infrastructure, $120 trillion. Carbon management is about $2 trillion for 20% of the emission. This is the more bang for your buck. So Jonathan was talking about putting the brakes. This is one of the solutions. It is not the solution. It is one of the solutions that we need to implement readily, and we're ready to go in that industry today.
Yeah, and that idea of there being no silver bullet. We're here to talk about direct air capture as a climate solution, not as the climate solution, but it is a pivotal solution in the future for net zero. And when we talk about direct air capture, rather than calling it science applied to life, instead you can think of it as science fiction applied to life. And we don't say science fiction applied to life because we don't understand the science. We do. We understand the science of capturing molecules of CO2, even at low concentrations like 400 parts per million. But you can think of it as science fiction applied to life because as far as I can tell, the very first reference for direct air capture was written in the year 1870 in the science fiction book 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the novel, the premise is that the characters are cruising around the world in a submarine. And at one point, the sub gets trapped under the ice at the South Pole. The main character exclaims, "If only we had the chemical methods that would enable us to drive out this noxious CO2. Now, at this point in the book, he's obviously referring to the asphyxiation potential of CO2 on a submarine. He's not referring to the global warming implications. But I think the timing of the book in 1870 was really prescient. Because only 15 years earlier, Eunice Foote, the American female scientist, was the first to discover that CO2 is a greenhouse gas. And then 20 years after the book was published, Svante Arrhenius was the first to propose that if we keep burning fossil fuels and emitting CO2 into the atmosphere, we might warm the entire planet.
Now you know why we're called Svante. Arrhenius was not a good name to pick.
A little bit of namesake, yeah. But the other thing to take away from that is that 130 years later, we know now that Svante Arrhenius was right, that the CO2 we've emitted into the atmosphere has warmed the entire planet. But we know not only that, but the IPCC has given us incredible models that detail how many molecules of CO2 warm the planet by how many degrees. And further still, the IPCC gives us mitigation scenarios, ways that we can reduce our CO2 emissions over time to keep global warming below 2 degrees or below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So you're looking at those mitigation scenarios right now, 1.5 on the left and 2 degrees on the right. And the purple line in the middle is CO2 emissions. So the important thing to take away is that in all these scenarios, you can see that we reach net zero CO2 by mid to late century. But then if you look at that line, it goes below zero, that we need to become net negative CO2 emissions, that we have to pull more CO2 out of the atmosphere than we emit up into it every single year. That's the idea of carbon dioxide removal. And Claude kind of alluded to this before, but there are lots of ways to do carbon dioxide removal. Direct air capture is not the silver bullet. We should afforest and reforest every acre of land available to us. We should perfect things like soil sequestration in our agriculture practices. We should pursue things like bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. But even after we've done all of those things, and we've used every acre of land available to us, the IPCC predicts that we might need to pull 1 gigaton per year using direct air capture machines. 1,000 million tons of CO2 with direct air capture.
Oh, by the way, 20 gigaton is 20,000 plants of a million ton. So, when we build 1 million ton reference direct air capture, there's 20,000 that needs to be developed and deployed over the next 30 years. Daunting.
And it's daunting. But like I said, we understand the science. We know how to capture CO2 even from the atmosphere. We've known since 1870. You don't have to go any further than a few paragraphs later in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Jules Verne tells us exactly how to do it. He says all you have to do is shake containers filled with potassium hydroxide. But unfortunately for them, that substance was missing on board and nothing else could replace it. So now at this point, Jules Verne is bordering on downright prophetic, because how could he have possibly predicted that 150 years later, one of the leading technologies for direct air capture is a process called chemical looping, pioneered by carbon engineering in Canada. They use a potassium hydroxide solution to pull CO2 out of the air in the form of a carbonate. But where Jules Verne was wrong was that this is the only way to capture CO2. Jules Verne didn't know that we were going to invent things called nanomaterials, that we would invent solid sorbents that have the selective capacity to filter CO2 from a mixed gas stream. And that's the scope of our relationship with Svante, between 3M and Svante, solid sorbent-based direct air capture solutions.
So what is it? It's nano powder. You take it in the palm of my hand, it's like a little fine powder like flour, but we engineer this material to look like this. It's like a cube with little pores inside, and when you pass a gas of CO2 and nitrogen, either from the air or from a point source, the CO2 sticks inside the pores, and then when you eat up the material, then the CO2 is being released. So you're using this as a way to catch and release and concentrate the CO2 from a very low concentration, let's say from the air 0.04 to a 95% pure CO2, then you can then manage more economically to do something with it or to store the CO2. So typically the industry have been using solid sorbent for many years, but they've been using traditional vessels that we call cylindrical pack beds, and you have 3 of them because you have a cycle of adsorbing, which is catching the CO2 into the pores of that material. Then you need to desorb, which is releasing the CO2. That's the second vessel doing it while the first one is being filled. And then you need to cool because you need a temperature swing to be able to do that process. So the inventory of sorbent that's required to do this is quite big because you have 3 vessels working in sequence to do the process. So what we've done at Svante is we've invented a nanomaterial that quickly can catch and release that CO2 and flip it and be able to do this thing in seconds instead of hours. And we're doing it like it's like having a sheet of paper in which we can stick basically CO2. And then we'll go through the process of how we do these things with 3M, and you'll see that what we do is we take the beads and we put it in a very fine powder, and then we coat it on a sheet, and then that sheet is then stacked to create a filter.
And Gayle kind of talked about this, but I think it's really important to think about 3M products. We are really good at putting things into a roll. Whether it's Scotch tape or sponges or graphics or films, we do a lot of things in rolled goods. We also have a lot of expertise in filtration technologies. So the idea that you can take these solid sorbents and put them into a rolled good is a really core competency of 3M and allows us to work with Svante, who can take that material and do something more with it.
So by stacking all these sheets, once we've coated on a sheet of paper, then we can stack these little sheets and create a spacer so we can minimize the pressure drop when you push the air or you push the flue gas through the filter, and then you package them into a box that's modular, and that becomes a filter modules, and then these filter modules are then put into a complete filter bed that you can use to do the filtering. So CO2 flue gas goes right through the filters and sticks inside the paper filter, and then you release it by heating up the system.
And so I think this is an important point too, because a lot of people think of filtration, you think of like a Filtrete filter, your at-home furnace filter, where the gas is flowing through some filtration media. In this scheme here, you're flowing along it. So you're flowing in between the gaps, between the sheets that Claude and Svante are putting together. So it gives you more energy optimization because you have a lower pressure drop through the system. And then like he said too, it's a sponge. So it's not a filter in the sense that you would use it until it's saturated and discard it. It's something that can be reused over and over in that temperature swing process.
I think Jonathan earlier was talking about granular, modular approach, something you can do and have a good learning curve as you make more of these. It's very similar to the way you do lithium batteries. It's coating, multiple sheet, thin film technology, solid state, and that's the knowledge that we're leveraging to do this thing.
And it becomes modular when it goes to the process, right?
Yeah, so if you put many of these filter modules into a container in which you have a fan, and the fan blows it, basically the air through it, you can catch the CO2 out of it. In the case of air capture, it takes maybe in order of maybe less than 45 minutes and 50 minutes to do the cycle, when in the point source, we do this thing in less than 60 seconds because we have higher concentration material. But when you stack many of these filters into a container, you have a cycle of catch and release and cooling happening within this thing. So you have hundreds of these sea container equivalent that does the filtering and regeneration of that filter continuously. So the overall process is that you go from a nanomaterial, we put it on a sheet, we cut and stack, we put them into a box, and that becomes the contactor to do the catch and release. Very modular approach for manufacturing.
And this is the spirit of collaboration, too. If you look at the breadth or complexity of this value chain that we're showing, from the sorbents to the roll, the sheets, the stacks, the process, the plant, that is too much for any single company to manage. Everybody has expertise in those different areas. So part of the reason that we are collaborating with Svante is to build out the expertise of that value chain and help scale this entire industry.
So once you've done this, you need to do something with the pure CO2. So people are looking at doing it in multiple use of CO2, converting it to synthetic aviation fuel and the like. But the one that will give you a permanent lock of that CO2 and putting it back where it came from is basically storage. And storage is a mechanism in which you go deep, about 3 kilometers underneath the surface, and you lock the CO2 into a saline reservoir. It's like making fuzzy water, and over time the salt reacts and create a solid. So that's the way to lock permanently. Right now, around the world, there's multiple CO2 hubs being developed for storage, permanent storage of CO2, and we're quite fortunate here that in North America, we have plenty of safe storage capacity. This technology has been known for about 50 years, operating quite safely in industries.
And this is an important point, too, when you look at the overall suite of carbon dioxide removal solutions, is the idea of permanence. When you consider things like nature-based solutions, there's always a likelihood in the next 50 or 100 years those carbon sinks that you've built go away. And we were talking last night about how much wildfire is currently going on in Canada and what the CO2 emissions are of these natural carbon sinks. When you have a scheme like this that allows you for geological long-term sequestration, that CO2 becomes permanently locked away. And as Claude alluded to, ultimately allows you also to pursue future pathways where that CO2 can be utilized in other industries that need to decarbonize but have a hard time without a circular CO2 economy.
So I'll use the reference of a million-ton plant. Remember, we need to do 10,000, 20,000 of these million per ton per year CO2 plants. So I think we're going to make a fun exercise of saying how many Post-it does it take basically to make the surface equivalent?
Right, right. So if you think about 1 million tons of CO2. So I think, first off, it makes sense to use 1 million tons because the US Department of Energy right now has a direct air capture hubs program. So by the early 2030s, they want to build 4 direct air capture hubs, each of which can capture 1 million tons of CO2. So we're using 1 million tons as our unit of measurement. But imagine, I happen to have one on me. Imagine you have a Post-it note size piece of sorbent on a roll. This sorbent on a roll, the size of a Post-it note, pretend that 3M manufactured this using one of our most advanced manufacturing processes. Inside of it, we packed a sorbent with the highest capacity to pick up CO2. Svante converts it into one of their most sophisticated filter packs, and then it gets deployed into one of the world's most efficient direct air capture processes. In a year, this size piece of material could pick up a few hundred grams of CO2, hundreds of grams. So if you want to get to 1 million tons of CO2, you would need more than 1 billion Post-it note size pieces of sorbent on a roll. You'd have to go around the world 2 to 3 times with the material. And that seems like a lot until you remember that 3M makes enough Post-it notes annually to go around the world 109 times.
So if we do 10 gigaton, it means I need to do like 30 times what you do.
Exactly. So if you have to get to a gigaton, 1,000 million tons, now you have to do that 30 times over. But Gayle mentioned it too. Post-it is one of 60,000 products that 3M makes. We can make a lot of materials in roll-to-roll processes at that scale.
So it's big but feasible.
It's big, but it's feasible. But it isn't just about how much you make, it's about how quickly you can scale it up. And this is what Jonathan talked about as well. The time value is really important. So consider today, on the planet, through direct air capture facilities, we capture 5,000, 10,000 tons of CO2 per year. 5,000 tons per year. So in 40 gigatons of CO2, that's inconsequential. That's a rounding error. But the DOE has that goal that we're capturing millions of tons by the early 2030s. That means that from where we are today, we have to double capacity every year for the next decade. And that's challenging. Doubling any industry every year is not an easy thing to do, but you can do it. So in November, or the end of the year in 2019, 3M learned about a novel coronavirus that was spreading around China. January of 2020, 3M ramped production of disposable respirators. We knew that was going to be a critical science-based solution to one of life's pressing challenges, helping to mitigate COVID-19. And by the end of the year, we doubled production, more than doubled. We were making 95 million per month by the end of the year. But it wasn't easy. It took countless hours of work by countless employees. We built new manufacturing lines. We had to make sure our quality control could keep up with double the throughput. We managed new supply chains to get raw materials in to make the product and then to get the product where it needed to go. Doubling within a year is really hard to do, but it's something that's possible, and that industry's proven we can do. But we've also said that this is still just 1 million tons. 1 million tons of CO2. If we have to get to 1,000 million tons, IPCC predicting that we might need to capture 1 gigaton by the middle of the year, that's a huge scale. So the first thing, obviously, is to innovate on the materials, right? If this material got better, if it could capture more CO2, if it could last longer in the application or enable lower energy consumption, that is one of the levers that will help you scale the industry. But that alone is not going to do it. The materials and the process for capturing CO2 are not the only things you need. Ultimately, it relies on the public acceptance. And there's a number of policy levers that have to go along with that, ones you're very familiar with.
So I think in the United States, what we're seeing with the IRA, so there's a 45Q tax credit where the US government will give you $85 per ton if you capture and store CO2 from industrial emission. And they'll give you $180 per ton if you do it from a direct or CDR, direct air capture. So these policies, I see them as being just the enabler to demonstrate, to de-risk the infrastructure or the supply chain to be able to do these things at the scale we've been talking about. So this is, to me, a solution that will have a short life of demonstrating and de-risking the industry. But we need to get into a more sustainable policy that will allow us to basically find a way to absorb the costs of doing these things. Air capture today is in the $600 per ton point source is in about $100 per ton. We need to find ways of reducing the cost of these things, but there's still going to be a price the society will have to pay for. And then we just need to find a way of developing the infrastructure and the ecosystem to do these things. So this is where public-private partnership is happening today to de-risk the industry and make sure that we have people who can make stuff, people who can make capture plants and build them up, people who can build up pipeline infrastructure when you need so. Direct air capture doesn't need it, so that's a good thing and not having to build, but we need storage capacity to put it all in place, and then the business model that allows people to do these things economically. So that's what public partnership is required, and without the public and private finance, we won't be able to deploy $2 trillion worth, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. We need to do this with renewables, with electric vehicle infrastructure, with hydrogen infrastructure, all of it, $120 trillion. Remember, we did an experiment during COVID. We stopped the economy for 2 months for $10 trillion. So we knew what 10 trillion looks like. It's 2 months of sitting at home waiting for COVID to pass. But we could have taken 10 trillion and fixed the problem of carbon management for life. So when people say it's too expensive, I don't think so. The consequences of not doing it's too expensive.
And ultimately, when you look at all of these things, there's lots of levers, and especially on the finance side of things, news in the last few weeks about major investments by net zero committed tech companies into the direct air capture space. There is a lot of that at a tactical level. But ultimately, this is still a public project. Every direct air capture facility that ever gets built, the 1,000 of them at 1 million tons, are going to wind up inside a community. These are community infrastructure projects. And a huge part of any climate solution, but specifically of direct air capture, is that that industry gets scaled different from the way we've operated before. So the last 130 years since Svante Arrhenius' prediction is not just a story of CO2 and temperature, it's a story of social change. The next 130 years is going to be a continued story of social change. So when you build 1,000 community-based plants, it's incredibly important that the communities have a voice, that they get to decide where and to what extent direct air capture gets deployed in their community, that they get to reap the economic or environmental benefits that direct air capture and a carbon market are bringing into their community, and that the entire time DAC providers, owners, and operators are working closely with the community grassroots organizations, making sure that they are brought along every step of the way. Because this industry can't grow by acquiescence. It has to grow by empowerment of individual communities that they want to help deploy climate solutions. And I think, so that idea of empowerment, I think, is an incredible motivator. So I'll give an example from 3M. We have what's called 15% time culture. It's a somewhat unconventional idea, but it means that every 3M employee can spend 15% of his or her time pursuing whatever passion project they want. And again, it sounds unconventional, it sounds a little chaotic, but it's how creative innovation happens, that you have the freedom to pursue new job functions, new science that aren't part of your regular day-to-day job description. And 5 years ago, nobody at 3M had a job description that said, figure out carbon capture. But we started. It started as 15% time. It started grassroots. We started working with Svante. Within the first year that we worked with Svante, more than 80 3M employees volunteered their own 15% time to get it to where it is today. That's the power of empowerment, that you can bring climate solutions to bear if you feel like you're part of the solution. And that doesn't stop with just R&D or early phases. It extends to manufacturing, and it extends to redeployment and development of new skilled trades.
Like 6 years ago, we were 25 people, no money in the bank, and just enough for 2 months. And today we're 300 people. We hire about 100 people a year and growing, and we've raised 500 million just to get to the starting line of deployment.
And people want to work on climate solutions. So even within 3M, when we look at where we're going to manufacture these products, these are existing domains of expertise where we make rolled goods, other kinds of rolled goods. And when you talk to the plant and say, hey, we want this to also think about making the next generation of climate solutions, 10 other people join the call. They want to be a part of that. But that alone still isn't going to be it. It's not just a redeployment of existing skilled trades. There has to be development of new skilled trades at the same time. Welding, pipe fitting, all of the things that go into the infrastructure are a critical component to building direct air capture industry. and at the same time, making sure that you're prioritizing those underrepresented communities that have not had the benefit for the last 130 years. So I think if we end on a similar theme to Jonathan Foley, and we're going to end early because our intent was to give at least 10 minutes for Q&A, because we know this is a tough topic. As Jonathan Foley talked about, one of the most important takeaways is that there is hope. If you look at the 1.5 or the 2-degree pathways, the door is closing, but it has not closed. We still have time. We have a lot of climate solutions today, and we understand where to go with the next generation of climate solutions. But it takes scale, it takes collaboration, and it takes innovation. And that's part of the reason that we're here today, is that that collaboration has to occur outside of our circles. It has to be everybody, the communities.
You know, as a conclusion, I would say that I'm quite optimistic about the future. I have 5 kids and 2 grandkids. I think you have one.
I have 1 kid, no
kid
grandkids.
or younger. I feel that I see a lot of people when I travel, and lots of people like Svante and 3M and others are working really to find solutions to this. So I think we will give, like whenever I have less to go than you do, but I think I see that there's a legacy of solution that will be for them to implement. So, but I'm also realistic. Right now we are polarizing the narrative in the media. And it's, you know, when my chairman told me one day, he says, every cause needs an enemy. So the renewable in the last 10 years took fossil fuel as the enemy, rightly so. But we need to stop this narrative. It's all of the above that we need. There's no bullet solution. It's all of the above. And the enemy is carbon. We need to manage the carbon. Stop saying it's better renewable, not do this. Fossil fuel is part of our life. We're trying to get less addicted to it. But there will still be residual carbon that we have to make cement and steel and fertilizer that we need to grow our population. So we need to get to managing the carbon. And we're now in the mode of acting and not talking about it anymore. We're building, as we speak in Vancouver, a factory to make these filters that you just saw. And these filters, that plant will have a manufacturing capacity to do 10 plants of 1 million ton for point source. I have no purchase order from any emitters yet, and I'm building a factory to build 10 plants of 1 million ton. We need to do 10,000 of those for point source. And if I convert this one to make filters for point source, for DAX, I have 0.3 million ton capacity because I need more filters to suck the CO2 out of the air. So we are building the capacity, and we're getting ready to scale quickly.
We've officially hit the red light. So I think we'll conclude with saying thank you. And we'll look forward to talking to you more.